This is an operational instructional video for the RIADA Model 8PA pressure overflow filler. We'll go over operation of the control panel, we'll go over setup of the machine and bottle changeover. We'll start with the control panel, the touch screen, and we'll cover it. All right, on the touch screen, we have three different screens. The first screen covers the bottle index and getting the bottles in and out of underneath the fill nozzles. The second screen is basically where you're entering your times for the filling process. And the third screen is a status screen. It tells you what's running, what's not, what's on, what's off. It helps with troubleshooting, helps with setting the machine up. All right, let's go back to the first screen and let's talk about the times that we'll enter in here. All right, the way this machine sets up, when you first hit the start button, the bottles that are underneath the fill heads that are full will be conveyed out, and it'll convey the new ones in. That's the first step of the process. So we have an entry cylinder and an exit cylinder. And what we basically have to do is set those times to get the bottles in and out underneath the fill nozzles. Now the first time we have is our entrance cylinder delay. And what we do is after we've hit the start button, the conveyor starts automatically and the exit cylinder pulls. And we'll set this entry cylinder delay to hold those empty bottles back for 1 second to 2 seconds. And what that's going to do, it's going to create a gap between the full bottles leaving and the empty bottles coming in. And then we want to time our exit cylinder to extend in that gap to catch the empty bottles to stop them. And then we'll have a conveyor run time. You want the conveyor to run long enough once the exit cylinder has extended for the bottles to tighten up against that exit cylinder so there's no gaps in the bottles that are coming in. And then the delay entrance extend timer is just the time we put on after bottles have come in, the conveyor stopped, before we just extend the entry cylinder back out. You just set it on 1 second, you never have to mess with it. All right, the second screen is we cover the filling process. So now we've got our bottles in, the empty bottles underneath the heads, and we're ready to start filling. All right, we're going to have the first time is a delay head down. We've got the bottles in, we're going to wait 1 second, give everything a time to settle out, the bottles, make sure the bottles are true and straight. It gives them just time to settle down a little bit, and then the head will come down. Okay, we have a head down time, which is how long the head will actually stay down on top of the bottles. Our delay pump on. Once our head comes down, we're going to delay the pump for 1 second before it comes on. And then this is our pump run time. And our pump run time, you want to run it long enough till you'll see all 8 heads overflow. We'll cover how you can do that or notice that and know that that's happening a little bit later. And the cycle time is at the end of the process. Once it's done filling, once the head's raised back up, it's going to sit there for however long we have this time, what time we have in this timer. And that's kind of how you set the rate of production. The more time you have, if you need more time down the line to put caps on or whatever, you can add time, because that's just waiting before it'll repeat the cycle again. So the closer you get that to 0, the sooner it'll repeat. Now the way you enter times, if you wanted to change something, just press the timer, tells you what the current setting is, and just push in whatever time you want. If you want to change, you want less time, we only want 2 seconds in there, put 2, enter, and it changes it. All right, the controls below the touch screen, let's cover those now. The top one here is actually our conveyor speed. This particular machine's got a DC drive on the conveyor system. And this just basically controls the speed pot for this, speed how fast the conveyor travels. We've got a conveyor switch where we can actually turn the conveyor off, which comes in handy when you're setting the machine up. You can turn the conveyor switch off and it'll basically run through the cycle, just the conveyor won't come on. And we've got a float switch where we can turn our float off and our supply return tank, and you'll use that when you get down to the end of a run. And if you're controlling an external pump to keep the supply return tank full, you'll be able to turn it off so it's sitting there, it's not trying to run the pump when you're out of product. And then we have an E-stop. Anything goes wrong, shut it off. E-stop kills it, or the stop button. Now I'd like to go over how a pressure overflow filler actually works and the setup of how you get your fill heights right, hit your fill weights, and how you set up the head bar assembly to do that. The way a pressure overflow head works is you have a supply return tank. We're coming, this particular machine, we're coming through an air pump. It's pumping through a manifold through this top hose. It's coming into the nozzle, down through this center tube. And when we open this head, fluid travels down the center tube and out these holes into the container. Now, this is a rubber sealing washer, and it seals off on top of the bottle. So, actually, the more important part than actually putting the fluid in is getting that air out so we can get the product to go in. And the way that works is this outer sleeve, the air travels back up this outer sleeve and out this lower hose back to the supply return tank. And the way we set the level in the containers is at what point we put this overflow point in the container. And we adjust that by the amount of spacers we have we have a series of different length spacers to put on these nozzles. So the more we have sticking out, the longer this sleeve is, the further it's going to be down the bottle and the less it's going to be fluid we're going to put in the container. So if we add spacers and we actually raise that overflow point up, it's going to put more product. So what you need to remember is you add spacers to add product and you take off spacers to take out product. So if I wanted to add another ½ inch of height in this bottle, I would add a ½ inch of spacer to this head. Now the important part, the main thing you got to remember is when this head bar comes down onto the containers, you want to check and make sure all these springs are fully compressed. Because if they're not, the head will not fully open and the product has a hard time returning, and if you're trying to pump into a bottle, you can't evacuate the air, and bottles tend to swell up, it'll tend to breach the seal here and leak. So very important, you've got to make sure that all these spring coils are touching when the head goes down. And the way we set that, we can control how far it comes down with these crank handles with the stops on them. It's a physical stop when it comes down. If we need to lower it a little bit more, we can crank them up. If we need to raise it up, we're putting too much pressure, we'll start to crush our bottles, we can crank them down some. Now the collars on the top, they limit the travel up. You want probably anywhere from 3/8 to ½ inch above your containers in the up position, just so your bottles have clearance and none of the nozzles come in contact for conveying them in and out. Now we have adjustment in our air cylinder. If you've got a tall bottle, you've got a short bottle, this is made where you can it's got adjustment where you can slide it up and down. If you run out of travel in your air cylinder, we have adjustment, you can slide it down or you can slide it up. You can also, if you've got a really small bottle, you can flip it over and you've got adjustment down in that bracket. Now I'd like to go over the setup of the conveyor and the entry and the exit cylinder, getting that set up for your different size bottles. Conveyor railing is adjustable in and out. You want to have that set where the bottles are centered underneath the heads. All right, our exit and our entry cylinder, so it's an 8-head machine. We're working with 8 bottles. We want to center 8 bottles with the air cylinder that lifts the head is the center. We'll center the 8 bottles in there, and we'll put the exit cylinder up against the first one coming in, and we'll push them tight, and then we'll set this entry cylinder, and it doesn't have to contact the bottles. You actually don't want it to go between the bottles. So as long as it catches in the round bottles, you have that curvature there where you can go in, because we just want it to hold the empty bottle back when it goes to the next cycle, but we don't want it to come in and hit this bottle or contact this bottle, which could knock it out of alignment for this last head. So it's just keep in mind that it doesn't have to go and shouldn't go all the way through these bottles. Now I want to go over getting product to the filling machine, getting your supply into the supply return tank. The connection is here. It's hooked to an air actuated valve. So if you're hooking up just a gravity system coming in, all you got to do is hook your supply here, and our float, which is adjustable height, will open and close this valve to let your product into this tank to keep the level consistent for our filling process. Now this float is adjustable. You want to keep it, you probably want to have 3 or 4 inches of head space in here, because you don't want to have the supply up so high that it's impeding the these return hoses coming in. So they've got to open access back into the return tank. We also have the ability, if you're using electric or an air pump, that we can control that also, an external pump. If you're pumping to this tank, where when the float calls for product, it'll open this valve and turn on control for your pump, whether it be air or electric pump, it doesn't matter. We can control either one. Because the air pump that's on the machine now is just for filling. It's pumping out of the bottom of the supply return tank, out the top to the manifold, and into the fill nozzles. Now the speed of it is controlled by the ball valve on the air line coming to it. So between the speed of the pump and how long our pump time is, that's how long we're filling the bottles. So you want it to run long enough that the return comes out the bottom line on the return hose that went over earlier back to the return tank. So when the last one, you get a little bit of overflow out, that's when you want to shut your fill time off.